Hi everyone. So the standard that I chose for our unit plan was a science standard. It was classify flowering and non-flowering plants into major groups, such as those that produce seeds or those like ferns and mosses that produce spores, according to their physical characteristics. So I'm mainly focusing on what the students can see in these different types of plants, like I have right here. And then as we get further down, my objective for this lesson was, or this unit, would be students will be able to accurately classify flowering and non-flowering plants based on physical characteristics. And they do a lot of different activities that will play on that objective of being able to classify these different plants. So some of the things that my students will be doing are obviously classifying. They will also be identifying flowering and non-flowering plants based on some of the characteristics that they can see. They will also be identifying and differentiating between the two, which is something that they will need to do in their summative. There will also be a plant sort in one of their activities, and then they have to defend how a spore and a seed are different. So then when we come down here into stage 2, my summative assessment is bringing in some real world experiences because my students would be tasked with being a landscape designer. They were hired for a company and they were asked to design a garden using a mixture of flowering and non-flowering plants. They will need to design a garden using 2 flowering and 2 non-flowering. And they would be given a worksheet that would show all of the different plants that they can choose from to place in the different plots in the garden. So I'm differentiating this, which I'll discuss in a minute, but for my below and on level students for this assessment, they'd be given something like this where it has plot 1, plot 2, and so on. And in each plot, there's a specific scenario that they need to meet with the plant that they choose. So for plot 1, it would be a plant with a fruit. And in their packet of all the different plants that they can choose from, they'd have to pick one that was a fruit, and then they need to justify and write why that plant would fit that characteristic to be in that plot. And then I differentiate this for my above level students. They'll have 5 plots of land with a specific area of the garden where one plot is kind of shaded. So I'm bringing in the area in which the plant is located. And then they also too would have this characteristic like a plant with a fruit, a plant with spores, but it would be more open. So you'd have to use all of these, but they'd be able to choose where it goes. So we have one area, which is the extra plot, which is in a shady area where I would be looking for them to be able to say, oh, a fern or a moss would go in here because that would be one of the characteristics that they would need to include. Because they would need to include a plant with a fruit, a plant with a spore, plants with flowers, and then plants with cones and a fern. So the 2 students that I would differentiate this for would be Lily and Sarah. Lily really enjoys and takes part in these classroom conversations, so being asked to justify her choices may be something that would be of interest to her. Whereas with Sarah, she enjoys creative projects that she can be creative with, so she would be designing her own garden, so I think that would be right up her alley for this. So this would be my arts integration because they are creating this type of design for this landscape. So as we come down, I have my pre-assessments, and then for my formative assessment, a major one that I'm using is this thing called Book Creator on iPad. So that would be my technology integration. So the Book Creator is an app that allows for many different activities. You can pretty much use it for anything. You can add as many pages to the book as you want. You can include pictures, text, video. There's a pen tool. You can record voice. And there's a lot of other features that can be added. So with this, it allowed me to differentiate for any of my students really. So one differentiation that I did was for my ELLs. Having that integration of being able to record my voice. I would record my voice for all of the instructions and also any of the questions on each of the slides in each of the pages of the book so that they can be successful and do it at the same pace as their peers. Because I know from my actual interning class that they do a lot better when they're verbally given instruction rather than having to read it. So this would be differentiating my readiness, because they definitely might not be as ready to read in English. So this would be something that would also be a process, because the content is the same for all students on all of these different pages. The only difference is how they are receiving it. So students like Juan, Francesca, and Leonardo will be receiving this information through voice. They can still follow along with the text, but they will mainly be receiving it through voice. I also am differentiating my readiness by including different levels of Bloom's questions. So all students will have access to this, but there's different levels of Bloom's questions that are aimed toward different types of students. I would definitely encourage all students to do all of these questions. They would need to, actually. But there's higher level Bloom's questions for my above level students, some lower level for my below level students, and it kind of differentiates by the readiness and where these students are at, so they're being challenged adequately. So some of the different variety of skills that these students would be doing is within the book creator itself. It'll serve as the portfolio for the summative. They're filling in the blank. They're sorting based on pictures, which would be good for some of my ELLs because they're looking at it and being able to visually see it. There's some extended response questions that I feel like would be good for students like Felix and Amir and Lily. Some of them are on level, and that's okay because they're still at a challenging enough level for these students where they're being pushed, but it's not going to make them discouraged by doing it. They're also naming different types of flowering plants. I felt Marcus and Jason would do very well with this. I know Jason is full of a lot of interesting facts, so maybe he'd have a lot of different ideas for flowering plants. And then there's a lot of different comparison questions. They're justifying here as well. Another type of assessment that I would do, I would take the students on a nature walk so that they're applying what they're learning and going around the school and seeing these different types of plants and trying to identify them in this physical concept. So I would collect notes as to what my students are discussing and if they are identifying these plants correctly. And then once we get back to the classroom, they will look back at the pictures that they drew in their ISN notebooks, and they will describe each picture of the plants that they saw. They'll be required to explain why they think that each plant was flowering or non-flowering. So that would be a good formative assessment as well. I also would be doing a Venn diagram about flowering and non-flowering plants. I learned in my ESOL class that Venn diagrams are a great way to get toward comprehension for ELLs. Because it gives a concrete physical thing that they can see, and it segments it so they'd be able to see this is what is flowering, this is what's not flowering, and this is what's the same. So it's something that they can look back at. I also have an EPIC library. This is where they'd be learning about all of the different types of plants that they could be using and seeing for their summative. So EPIC is great because you can create short reading quizzes for each of these different books. So I would do these reading quizzes to make sure that they're able to identify them correctly, because that's what they're going to be doing in their summative. It also allows me to differentiate. So because EPIC has a lot of the same books, but at different reading levels. And also they have some books in Spanish. So those below level students who are primarily Spanish speaking, like Leonardo, Juan, and Francesca, they might do really well with having this Spanish book. It makes it accessible to them because they're still working toward their English. And also Marcus would benefit from these lower level books just because he's a little bit below level in reading, but he does enjoy science. So this also would be a great way to get him excited about getting the opportunity to read about these different types of plants. For my on-level students like Amir, Brooklyn, and Lily, they enjoy science, and this would also give them the opportunity, just like Marcus, to read about the different science concepts that they're learning. So this would be a differentiated by readiness because they're getting these different levels of books that are appropriate for them in these different libraries that we would share with them. And then I would look at the scores from the quizzes and create questions for that. So, and then I would go back to the book creator and do a final book. After taking part of all these different experiences and different formative assessments, from looking at all of those different pages in their initial book creator to make sure that they're able to understand these different concepts, going on that nature walk and identifying and making observations from physical things around them in their school, reading about different types of plants in that epic library, and then culminating all of that into this final book. So they would have a few book creator slides with plots of land and characteristics for each plot. So this would be getting them ready for that summative assessment, because they haven't really worked with creating anything yet. They are able to identify and apply it, but they haven't quite gotten to that stage of creating based on what they know. So this would be a great way to make sure that they're ready for that assessment. So and then if we come down, I have more assessments like the self-assessment. So on all of the days of this, I would be asking them what was the most interesting thing they learned. Is what I learned today like what I already thought that these types of plants were? What helped my learning? What didn't I understand or struggle with? Because that question in particular I feel like is very helpful because you are able as the teacher to pinpoint what they're not understanding. From their perspective and helping them get to that point. And then they'd have their reflection. And through all of this, they're really doing a lot of different skills through the different formative assessments that are going to help me impact my learning because I'm going to be able to see what they're struggling with and giving them what they need because they're going to be doing some justifying on those book creator slides, some applying based on what they've learned on those book creator slides. They're making great observations by going out into the school and looking at these different types of plants. And they're also comparing and differentiating because that's something that they're definitely going to have to do on that summative. So a lot of my different assessments are taking place on the iPads. I made this decision because I've noticed that the students are very engaged when working on the iPads. Also, using the Book Creator app allows me to give them a lot of practice with everything because it's not taking I don't have to print anything. There's no paper involved. And also it makes the worksheet interactive because they can move text, they can move pictures, they can enlarge pictures, they can write, draw, pretty much anything. And it's extremely engaging. They're excited to use it, and it also allows them to do a lot of different practice with these different skills. And all of these different skills that they're doing not only on that book creator, but also through the Epic Library, the Venn diagram, the nature walk, all brings it back to this unit objective. Because all those different skills are preparing them for that summative assessment, which is having them classify those flowering and non-flowering plants, differentiating between the two and knowing which ones are going to be best where and how they know that each of these plants are what they think it is, because they're going to be able to have that knowledge to back up their justifications as to fill in those different plots. And all of those different skills and assessments are helping them get there.